sports are really important vehicles for relationships.
We have purpose. We have a why. We bring people together. We connect.
I feel like God is our greatest supporter and our greatest coach.
From Los Angeles, this is Rabbi Sherman and Rabbi on the Sidelines. This week we are joined by Steve Springer, Los Angeles Laker historian, author of 14 books within the sports world, member of the Jewish Sports Hall of Fame of Southern California, LA Times journalist, and if you're looking for a Kohen, he's the resident Kohen in Southern California. Steve, it's so good to see you.
Good to see you, Aaron. I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm great. I've been looking forward to this day probably since the day I met you 12 years ago when I moved out west to Shomrei Torah Synagogue. A shout out to our Shomrei Torah family. And we talk sports all the time, but most importantly, we actually met in shul. We met in the synagogue. So before we get to the sports world and Magic and Kareem and LeBron and Kobe, let's talk about synagogue. Let's talk about Jewish life. What was your road to your activity within synagogue ritual and Jewish community? How did that love come about?
Well, I had a great people for me who kind of blazed the trail. My grandfather came over from Eastern Europe, like so many others, and he never even had an English name his whole life. He only went by his Hebrew name, which was Moshe Zelig, which is my Hebrew name now. And my father was Orthodox, as was as far back as it goes in Poland, I think. He obviously took me to shul every holiday, every Shabbos when I was growing up. He learned Torah for the teenagers in a separate chapel at our synagogue congregation, Judea in West Los Angeles, so I grew up in an Orthodox home. It's not surprising that I followed the faith and continue to follow it.
So then let's talk about the other side, which is sports.
Okay.
You become a member of the Los Angeles Sports Hall of Fame, but through the journalistic way. When did you realize that you could actually take this road in sports? You know, there's a wonderful book by Dr. Jeffrey Gurak about American Jews encountering the world of sports. You spoke about your parents, grandparents being immigrants to this country. What did they know about sports, and how did you learn about American sports?
My parents didn't know a lot about sports, although my father took me to my first ball game at the Coliseum when the Dodgers were playing there. And, I used to tell people, I'd never been to a game. I'd never seen a lot of people in one place. And so when I went to the game, I always told people, I went to the Coliseum and there were 100,000 people there. I'd never seen anything like it. But then when I grew up and I got in the business, I found a website where you can get the box score of every major league game ever played. And so I knew it was a Thursday in 1958. And at the Coliseum, Dodgers and the Cincinnati Reds. I found it, and at the bottom of every box score, as you know, Ayers, is the attendance. So this huge crowd I'd never seen before. It was a day game. It was actually 13,000 people. So to me, that was 100,000. But I had a conversation I remember with my mother, and I said, because I was fascinated by Vin Scully, so I asked my mother, what does Vin Scully do for a living? And she says, he does the Dodger games. I said, I know, but like Dad sells clothes. Well, what did he do? She says, that's what he did. He did the Dodger games. And I said, I was just a kid. I said, he gets paid to go to games? And she says, yeah, I couldn't believe that. I said, that's what I'm going to do when I grow up. I'm going to get paid to go to games. Somebody would pay you to do this? I couldn't believe it as a kid. So that was right then and there. I decided my path in life, and I followed it.
So you followed it, but it took a little detour. Start with the beginning about your father-in-law and how you really got into journalism.
So I had never written a word other than college essays and stuff like that in school and college, obviously. But I majored in broadcasting because, again, I wanted to be Vin Scully, and I did all the football, baseball, and basketball games at then Valley State with Steve Talbot, a fellow broadcaster. Then I got out into the world and I got a job. I worked for the Dodgers in PR while I was still in school. And then when I got out, I got my first job in Calexico, California, which is right on the border, doing high school football games on radio. Then I moved to, my wife Annette and I moved to Indio, and I did the Indio High School Rajas football games. But I began to see that I wasn't going to be the next Vin Scully. So at some point, I realized we had a baby on the way, and I dropped everything. I enrolled in law school, and I went to work with my father-in-law in construction, which, as you know me, that's not exactly me. And then Annette's grandfather on the paternal side passed away, and we went to the funeral. And he was a wonderful person, and he always was helping people. His whole goal in life was to help people. And so he passed away, and we went to the funeral. And then, as with every shiva scene, we went to a relative's house, and there was a big deli platter on the dining room table, and people were coming and going. And Annette's one of her uncles, Marvin Sosna, was the editor of the Thousand Oaks News Chronicle. Mm-hmm. And again, I'd never written anything. So if I'd gone up to that table to get a corned beef sandwich a half hour, 5 minutes earlier or 5 minutes later, I'd probably be a lawyer now, and you wouldn't be talking to me. But I went up there, he was standing there, and just past conversation, I said, "So Marv, when are you going to hire me for your newspaper?" And he says, "Well, it's a funny thing you say that. One of my sports guys quit this morning. On my way over here, I found out, and I have to have somebody within the next 48 hours. But you've never done this before." I said, "I know, but I really think I could do it." He says, "Besides, you have a baby on the way." And Annette was 7 months pregnant with Dina, my daughter. And but Annette being Annette and being a wonderful wife, I said, "So what do you think?" She said, "If it'll make you happy, do it." It was totally irrational. And now I look back, what are you doing? You're quitting everything to jump into a field you know nothing about. But I took a risk, and I was at the News Chronicle for 5 years, learned the trade, and then moved on to the Orange County Register, where I started covering the Lakers, and then from there I was hired by the Times.
So it was from Thousand Oaks to Orange County to LA Times.
Right. Nobody starts at the LA Times,
right,
at least not in those days.
And then what was that? Take us back to that first Laker game that you realize you now have a front seat to the Los Angeles Lakers, and not only a front seat, but you have the responsibility to tell their story to the world. Well,
not only did I just, because I was a Laker fan growing up, like so many others, but the timing, just as the timing was perfect for me to just come up to that table to get my sandwich, the timing was perfect to cover the Lakers because Jerry Buss had just bought the team. Magic Johnson was a rookie just starting out. It was all beginning. Showtime was beginning, and I was there from the inception. So timing, again, couldn't have been better.
So take us to Showtime. What was Showtime? How did it come about? You had a very close relationship with Jerry Buss. When did you realize that this was something that was really special, not just for the LA community, but in fact, the entire world?
Well, Jerry Buss used to go to a nightclub in Santa Monica, and they would start the evenings. They had entertainment, and they would start the evening with 4 singers coming from all 4 sides of the place they were doing the entertaining. And each one would say, "It's showtime! It's showtime!" All 4 of them, and that kind of stuck with Buss. And Buss, he understood finances, of course, but he also understood entertainment. And he didn't just want a basketball team. He wanted an entertaining team, because this was Hollywood, and he was going to bring in all the celebrities to in the front row and in the courtside seats. And so he came up with this idea of this is what he wanted his team to be. And he hired Jack McKinney, who designed. Jack McKinney is an amazing story. He was a very good coach before he came to the Lakers. He only coached them for 14 games. During that time, he designed their offense, which Jerry Buss named Showtime, after that the nightclub he used to go to. And then he had a tragic bicycle accident, which left him with serious brain damage. He recovered enough to come back and coach other teams, but he never coached the Lakers again. And what I always found amazing was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar one time was asked, "Who are your 2 favorite coaches or best coaches over the years?" And he picked John Wooden, who was his coach in college, and he picked Jack McKinney, who coached him for 14 games. But Kareem understood that in those 14 games, he created this blueprint for Showtime, which lasted for more than a decade.
So what was that transition like from Kareem to Magic? Take us to the draft of Magic. Actually, take us to Magic at Michigan State. You've spoken to me a lot about him over the years. And let's go back to Magic in high school. He goes to Everett High School, where basically the school was beginning to be integrated black and white. What was Magic Johnson's role in high school? And what did he learn at Everett High that taught him that he could be an impetus for change in society, in the greater society, when he became a Laker?
Well, let's go back a little further. When Magic was just a little kid, he went to a Pistons game, and Kareem was then playing for the Milwaukee Bucks. And Irvin slept. I'm sorry, I call him Irvin because when you know him, that's his name. But you don't call him by anybody who knows him doesn't call him Magic, but we'll call him Magic for the sake of the show. So little Irvin snuck into the locker room and got an autograph from Kareem. And now to him at that moment, that was the highlight of his life. He couldn't imagine it would ever get better than that. So now he goes to high school, and there were busing issues going on, and there was a lot of tension in that school between African Americans and the white community. So the principal, Irvin was probably 16, 17. The principal calls him in, and he calls in the star quarterback for the team, who was white. And he says, I want you two to bridge the gap between black and white. I want you guys, each dealing with your own followers, your own crowd. I want you to see if you can release some of the tension and get these two sides together to live and play and work together. And Magic later told me, he says, I'm 16 years old, and all of a sudden I'm going to be the peacemaker. But that was his first experience with trying to deal with racism. And had nothing to do with sports, obviously, but he was the star basketball player. He was going to work with the star football player who was white, and he's done that all his life.
And one of those times that he's done it is Magic and Bird. If you haven't watched the movie Magic and Bird, Courtship of Rivals with Steve, you really are a large part of that story. It tells the story of Boston, Los Angeles, East and West, black and white. Two players that couldn't be any different, but at the end of the day, end up being the best of friends to make some difference in our society. Maybe take us a little through that relationship, how Bird would not even speak to Magic, right, when he would see him on the court. But then that moment, I believe, when they filmed the commercial in Indiana, all of a sudden they realize, actually, no, we are human beings and we have stories to tell.
Well, it's kind of funny when you look at it, because neither Magic nor Bird had anything to do with the cities they played in growing up. Mm-hmm. They're both Midwest guys. Larry's Indianapolis, Irvin, Michigan, and so now they're drafted and they go to Boston and Los Angeles. But just imagine, they don't have anything to do with those cities until they get there. Just imagine. Let's flip it a minute. Let's say Bird goes to L.A. and let's say Magic goes to Boston. Now Magic is depicted, because he was a great rebounder, this tough blue-collar guy out there banging people around, showing all the muscle. And Larry playing in L.A. with the blonde hair would have been Larry the Surfer. I mean, it's so funny how they're attached to cities. And everything. Instead, Magic's Tinseltown and Larry's the hard-nosed fighter. But you're right. They didn't. Well, Bird never got over the fact that Magic beat him in the NCAA championship game between the Indiana State and Michigan, and of course Michigan State, and of course it's the highest rated to this day. It's the highest rated basketball game of all time, at college or pro. And so that's how it began. Larry was he just wanted to get back at Irvin in the pros. And then you're right, they had the commercial, and it was actually Larry's mother, when they had a break in the filming, who invited Irvin in for lunch, and after that, and they became the best of friends, and the best of players, but also the best of friends.
So you traveled with the team all over the United States with the Lakers, specifically Showtime. There was no social media where a player would tweet and we would know what's happening on the airplane. What are some of the moments, let's say, of faith, right, that brought this Showtime team together that we didn't read about in the newspaper during those times, but today we would have seen on Twitter and Instagram or Facebook? What were you seeing behind the scenes that was really making this team be a community?
Well, what they would do in the days before, now they have charters and they're all, it's just the players, and there's a big gap between the players and the media and the players and the public. Back then, what the Lakers would do, they would buy out first class on our flight and seal it off. So we had like our own little living room away from all the riffraff, and it was just us. And so there was a chance to bond. We'd all go out. I mean, we go out to dinner together, all of us, players, writers. There wasn't that barrier, and we got to know them. They got to know us, and it was like traveling with a rock band. I mean, with all the women around and all the crazy stuff that went on, but still, we had a bond that they don't have nowadays. And I talked to the guys who cover beats nowadays, and they agree. It's all regimented. There's a 45-minute period before the game. You can go in the locker room. It's you can't approach them here or there. I mean, we stayed in the same hotels, flew on the same planes. Once we got on the road, we were all just a traveling party together, and it's so different now.
And now that you are with him, even in the good times, maybe take us to that moment when Magic Johnson found out that he had HIV, and I believe, right, you were at that press conference, and what did that moment look like for Magic Johnson as a human being, realizing that his life was about to change?
Well, at the time, AIDS was still relatively new to a large segment of the population. So I didn't know, and Irvin later told me he didn't know that there was any difference between HIV and AIDS. We all thought it was the same thing. So we thought, he got up there and said, I'm going to beat this thing. And I was saying to someone who was sitting next to me, this isn't beating the Boston Celtics. This is a deadly disease. He's going to die. And we're going to have to watch this in public. How painful is this going to be? And so there's a story, to back up a little bit. The Lakers were playing an exhibition game. They had just gotten into Salt Lake City. They were playing an exhibition game that night before the start of that season. And Irvin got a call from Lon Rosen, who was his agent, saying, the Lakers had got a life insurance policy on Irvin. And so he had to do a standard physical, and then he hadn't got the results yet. So Dr. Melman, who was his doctor, called Lon and said, I need to see Irvin right now. He says, well, he's in Utah at a game. No, he's got to come back today. And he wouldn't tell him why. So they booked him a flight. He flew home. Lon picked him up, and they went to Dr. Melman's office, and they told him that this result had come back positive for HIV, and he was crushed. So he didn't want to go home and face Cookie, his wife. Mm-hmm. And so he and Lon just went to a little fast food place, and they were sitting outside eating. And it's one in a million. This woman walks by, and she does the double take when she sees Magic, and she comes over. She goes, "Oh, Magic Johnson, I work for the AIDS Society. If there's any way, just a word from you, anything that you could tell people, it would help us. It would help raise money. Anything you can do." And then they finish the conversation. She walks away, and then Magic turns to Lon and he says, "Now I'm one of them." So, and after that press conference, Jerry Buss collapsed in Kareem's arms in backstage. It was just crushed. It was just hard to believe. And it's funny because whenever you see Magic, if you know him really well, which I do, he always wants a hug. That was just the standard thing. First time I saw him after that press conference, he had his arms out, and right through in my head, I'm thinking for a second, can I do this? Can I hug this guy? And I did it, but it turned out that it's nothing like COVID. The only way you can get AIDS from another person is through the exchange of bodily fluids. It doesn't. I did a story with a doctor one time who told me if two fighters could bang heads together and one of them has HIV and they could hold those heads together, and you can't pass it on. It only comes through the exchange of bodily fluids, which in a way it's sad that if Irvin had known that at the time, he could have continued to play, but no, people just didn't know enough about it. The good thing for him was that he came along. This disease hit him just at the time when they were really starting to develop the kinds of drugs that could control HIV, and he got the best, and he was able to take as long as he took his medication, which he still does. I mean, how weird is it? We thought this guy was going to die in his early 30s, and I bless him, he's still alive, and I'm so thankful. But he outlived Kobe. Who would have thought that?
Mm-hmm. So that's a good transition in terms of, let's call it the big three. We're going to keep Kareem off there for a moment, from Magic to Kobe to LeBron. So Kobe comes in right out of high school, again, not part of the city, but from Philadelphia. When did you realize that he was perhaps the reincarnation of Magic Johnson, bringing Showtime back?
Well, Chick Hearn told me one time that he had talked to Jerry West. He called Jerry West, and West was puffing and puffing when he was talking. And so Chick says, "What do you? It sound like you've been exerting yourself quite a bit. What were you doing? Jogging, or what were you doing?" He says, "No, I just came from the greatest workout I've ever seen by any player. And this is a 17-year-old." So that was a little. And then Jerry maneuvered things around so he could get Charlotte to draft Kobe and then trade him for Vlade Divac. And he became a Laker.
So it was a different era. They
Yeah.
played a little differently, but did Kobe see himself as standing on Magic's shoulders? Was he trying to identify himself as just Kobe himself? What made him different or the same as a Magic?
Well, he loved he knew about Magic and Kareem and all that, but his mission that he set for himself was to equal Michael. He wanted to be Michael because Michael was the guy at that point, and he wanted to do everything Michael did. He wanted to emulate him. He wanted to learn from him. He wanted to beat him. So his fixation was on Michael Jordan.
Yeah, of course. And what do you think his legacy was before he passed away in terms of his life and his career as a Laker? Better, worse, same? How did that compare?
Well, you can make the argument that he's right there. He won 5 titles, the same as the Showtime Lakers. He obviously he was unparalleled as a shooter, as a player, as an all-around, as a dynamic guy who wanted to be the Black Mamba, the guy who was mean and I'll tell you the story to show you that there's another side to Kobe which I really liked and I got to know and most people don't know it because he didn't.
Before you tell that story, I want to share the picture right here. This is a picture of Joey and Kobe, and maybe you can share that story of who Black Mamba was off the court that we didn't really see.
Okay, so Joey was the son of a woman, Linda Heredero, who my wife worked with, and unfortunately Joey got terminal cancer in his early 21, 22, and he was obsessed with Kobe, and he worked hard on his medication and his to taking all the medication and all the work he did based on Kobe's work ethic, and so his dream in life was to meet Kobe Bryant, and So Linda Nado asked me if there's any way he could. Now Kobe did a lot of charity work, but he didn't want anyone to know about it. He thought it should be private. And he had a rule too that he would do all the Make-A-Wish and all the charity events that he could attend, but he never did anything in the playoffs because to him the playoffs was separate. He had to concentrate. He just took time out from charity work during the playoffs. So I went to him and I asked him if he'd make an exception for this kid. By that point, Joey had already had a leg amputated. He was it was terminal. He had a terminal case of cancer, and Kobe said, yeah, he'd do it. And so the Lakers got Joey and his family parking passes and tickets, and when the game was over, it was a playoff game. We all went down in this at the bottom of Staples Center and waited. And when Kobe was done, he came in. And immediately he interacted with Joey. It was like they'd been best friends. Hey, where'd you sit tonight? I sat there when I was a kid, on and on and on. And Joey had 106-degree fever the day before, and he told the doctor he was going anyway. So the doctor said, well, then you have to get this sign from me if I'm going to let you go. So he kind of apologized to Kobe. I'm sorry I brought all this stuff. And Kobe said, don't worry about it. Once I start signing, I can't stop. So he signed everything. Then Kobe said, all right, everybody up, pictures. So he took pictures with everybody. And so when it was done, he was walking out the door and I went to shake his hand. And he said to me, I don't want to see this anywhere. I don't want you to write about it. I don't want to see you on TV talking about it. What I do because not for a pat on the back. I do it because it's the right thing to do. If you need anything ever like this again, you come to me privately, but no one needs to know that I do this. And so I honored that for a long time until Kobe agreed. We had a reunion later on, but unfortunately, 3 weeks later, Joey passed away. But that was Kobe. That was a Kobe that nobody saw, and that was the Kobe I knew, and that's why, he was really a wonderful person. I mean, he had his Black Mamba mask he wore when he was playing, but there was another side to him that he just kind of kept quiet. And
video an interview with Steve Springer and Kobe Bryant.
Yes, to be honest, what are you gonna miss most about being around here at Staples Center or on the road?
Like outside of the game, it's always relationships and the camaraderie with teammates, and even dealing with the media to a certain extent. Because that's all part of it, right? But nothing supersedes the game. I mean, I grew up here, and a lot of the people that work here actually came from the Forum. They've watched me grow up from 17 years old till now.
Is there a trace of sadness in the fact that it's coming to an end?
No, it's I'm thankful. I'm not sad at all. Not sad at all. I mean, I left no stone unturned. I mean, I gave everything to the game, and for 20 years in the NBA, and then more before that.
Looking back on that interview, knowing that he's not with us now, take us back to that moment saying, I left no stone unturned. I think it's a beautiful Yisker sermon, right? I left no stone unturned.
Right.
Your thoughts on that?
Well, it still hurts. I mean, it was so. I mean, any accidents is unnecessary, but this one was just so unnecessary. And I think people saw another side of Kobe, but his life after. I'll tell you, he was. I wrote a book with Karan Butler, and supposedly,
we're going to get to that next.
It's going to be made into a movie. Mark Wahlberg's already committed to it. So when I saw Kobe after that, he says, "Hey, congratulations on the movie. You're going to win an Oscar." And I said, "Kobe, it's a sports movie." He says to me, "No. Whatever you do, you go for the top. If you're a basketball player, you go for a championship. And if you make a movie, you go to make an Oscar." And ironically, Kobe won an Oscar for his basketball short that he did. So, I mean, that other side of him that came out after he quit playing, and all the potential he had ahead of him, it was sad enough, but that even made it sadder. So
there's an obvious trust between you and Kobe, just like you and Magic. But you said Kobe's living in a different era. How did you gain that trust with Kobe in the way that you could sit down and speak like that freely with him?
Well, he I was always around, and he knew, who I was and what I did. And so we just got along well. And my son, Alan, who's now in the business, Alan's working for Sports Illustrated. He's had his own relationship with Kobe. And it was kind of a family affair. Kobe did a funny video for us right before Alan's marriage to Lauren, which we showed at the rehearsal dinner. So that he would always do those little things. I mean, I never had any trouble approaching him. He actually wrote the foreword for me for Karan's book. So
let's talk about Karan's book for a moment. Tough Juice. I'm a Syracuse guy, so it's hard to read a UConn success story. But Karan is an amazing story, and it's Rabbi on the Sidelines, intersection of sports and faith. Let's talk about Karan Butler, his story and his faith story. You were gracious enough to connect Karan to Sinai Temple here, and he came to Sinai Temple basketball camp, a highlight of our camp over the last couple of years. But Karan Butler grows up in Milwaukee, not the same story as not as stable of a family as a Kobe, as a Magic Johnson, right? How does Karan take his story there, and why did you find it so? He didn't play for the Lakers, but you found it fascinating that you wanted to take his story on to tell it. What's so special about Karan in that moment of faith that he has?
Well, actually, Karan played for the Lakers for 1 year. So,
right. Sorry.
Yeah. So, no, I mean, it was an incredible story. He grew up in total poverty. He was a drug dealer at the age of 11. I mean, he had. There was a group that were selling drugs, and they did it in the basement of his house, and they tossed him what they called crumbs, and he started to put these in little blue bags, and he had a paper route. So he'd get up at 5 a.m, wrap his papers, he had a little red wagon. He put these little bags of cocaine, crack cocaine in the wagon, and on top of that he put the layer of papers, and then he'd walk down the street. He'd toss a paper. Someone would come over, ask for a little bag. He's charged $40 for a bag of crack cocaine. He sold that. Then he went back tossing papers. It was unbelievable. And he was making $400 a day as an 11-year-old. And then he got, he grew up grew up and he got into gangs, and the police were always after him, and he was arrested something like 15 times. But then he wound up in solitary confinement in a juvenile facility, and then when he got out, his mother shipped him away to the East Coast, where he went to a prep school. Wound up going to UConn, became a star there, and wound up in a first-round draft choice picked by the Miami Heat. And he now lives near me here in Walnut Acres in the San Fernando Valley, and got 3 great daughters, great wife, wonderful family, and all that's. And now he goes back to Racine, Wisconsin, which is the ghetto where he grew up, and he now drives around in the patrol car with the guys who were always arresting him, trying to keep the peace in town, and does all these charity events and gives away bicycles and coats in the winter. He's an amazing guy. He really is.
So telling his story, I believe, is a way of changing things, changing children, changing communities. Is there a story or two that you have written over the years that you realized that when you wrote these words on paper, or let's say on a screen nowadays, that this was going to make not just reporting an event or reporting a game, but this had the ability to change something, not just in sports, but outside of the world of sports as well?
Yeah, I mean, you have an amazing platform, but you also have an amazing responsibility when you write, and especially back in the day when everybody bought the newspaper. The LA Times on Sunday had over 1 million readers, which they figure 3 to 5 people read a newspaper. So you got an audience of 5 million people. One of the things I did after the riots here in the 90s, the Watts riots, I sat out with Magic, and I did a Q&A with him in which he started talking about building up the black neighborhoods, about bringing in industry, about bringing in stores and jobs. And that story got a great acclaim. I did a story, I was part of a group, we broke down a gambling operation which, based on my story, the FBI interceded and shut this group down. But I'll tell you, I learned that you can have an influence in so many different ways, and I'll tell you a real quick story if I could. So I was covering the Dodgers one night, and I'd just seen the movie Saving Private Ryan, which I'm sure you remember about World War II. And so the PR guy comes by and says to me that this guy has terminal cancer. He was in the landing on Normandy, and he was dying, and he'd spent. Eric Karros, who was his favorite Dodger, had spent 45 minutes with him if you want to put a note in your story. So I was sitting there thinking, this guy may have saved my life before I was even born. I mean, if D-Day doesn't happen, isn't successful, we might have lost the war. The Nazis might have gotten the bomb before us. And so what I did probably wasn't professional, but I just did it. I said, you've written thousands of sports stories. You always put in the lead, the score, and all that. Messing around with that. But I didn't do that. I can't remember his name right now, but I used his name to lead off the story at the top of the sports page. Joe Jones is a happy man tonight, even though his Dodgers lost, because he's got to spend 45 minutes with his favorite player. And I know. See, back then, before the internet, there was only one edition of the paper. And our deadline was 10:30. And when you're covering the Dodgers, you're the last thing in the paper, and they have no time to do anything other than look for grammatical errors or misspellings. So I knew it was going to have to run. They may not like it, and they may talk to me about it tomorrow, but tonight they're going to have to run this. So I wrote it like that, and it was fine. And then about 2 weeks later, I got a call from a woman. She says, "I'm Barbara Smith. You wrote about my father. I want to let you know he passed away last night." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry." She says, "Don't be sorry. What you did, our family will never forget." He had that paper right by his hospital bed, and everybody who came in, he showed it to them. And you made the last 2 weeks of his life so enjoyable. And so I realized that you can have such an impact just with one person. And funny thing is, I was in the Dodger locker room after that. And Eric Carroll says, "Hey, I saw your story." I says, "Yeah, well, I just saw Saving Private Ryan." And Eric says, "I just saw Saving Private Ryan too. That's why I spent 45 minutes with him." So we laughed about it, that we'd both been so affected by this guy that we each done in our own way. We'd each kind of try to help him in his final days.
So you covered all the big LA teams, the Lakers, the Kings, the Dodgers, UCLA basketball, but also you covered
USC football,
USC
Olympics.
football, Olympics, everything. You've covered it.
Right.
And now Alan, your son, does an amazing job. Alan's
Right.
going to be our next guest, but of course we bring in our elders before our children. So that's why you got the first call. But the boxing you've also covered. And one of the people you've covered was actually Dmitry Salita, who is a Russian Jew.
Right.
You told me an amazing faith story about him combined, actually two amazing faith stories. Tell us about a Saturday night bout with him, and then also maybe how he got into one of the boxing matches that he didn't really have a ticket to.
Yeah, so Dmitry was born in what was then the Soviet Union, and he knew he was not allowed, he was not exposed to Judaism whatsoever. And then he came to America, and his mother passed away, and he wanted to, he understood that there was a Kaddish and a way to memorialize her. And so he went to services at a Chabad in New York. He was living in New York. He went to a Chabad there, and he never left. And he became Orthodox. He went from not even knowing what Judaism was to becoming Orthodox. And so I'll tell you the one story first is that so one night I was covering a fight at Madison Square Garden, and I was walking in, and there I see Dmitry standing off to the side. And I said, Dmitry, you coming to the fight tonight? And he had his head down. He was kind of naive at that point. He didn't really understand New York quite. He's like, I can't. I said, oh, you don't have a ticket? He said, well, actually, I bought a ticket on the street from someone, and it turned out to be a phony ticket, and now I can't get in. Oh, come on, you're not going to stand out here. So I came to the door, and I said, I have my credential. And I said, this is a fighter. He needs to come in, too. And the guy looks at him, the bouncer looks at him, and he says, well, how do I know he's not going to cause me problems? I said, he's an Orthodox Jew. He's not going to cause you any problems. Let him in. So he got in that way. But after he became a professional fighter, I think it was the MGM Grand. We were in Vegas. It was a Saturday morning, and somebody called me. We were staying in the same hotel, the MGM, of course. And he said, could you come up to Dmitry's room at 9 o'clock? We need a minion to do the Shabbos morning services. So, I mean, that's the kind of relationship I had with him. But he would fight on Saturdays on Shabbos, but he wouldn't fight until normally he was just starting out his boxing career, and those guys fight early, and then the big fights take place 8, 9 o'clock at night. But in Dmitry's case, he would only fight after the sun went down. So they allowed him to fight later on the card. So he was in the locker room waiting to fight, and it was the sun had already set. So he decided to do with his manager, trainer / rabbi to do a Havdalah service. And so, they light the candles, do everything. And the other fighters are standing around watching. And so one of the other fighters, I think, lost his fight. And he comes in the locker room and he says to Dmitry, could you teach me how to do that thing with the candle where it helps you win? Because Dmitry won his fight. He says, could you teach me that thing with the candle that helps you win the fight? And so in the minds of these other fighters, lighting that candle and doing the Havdalah was the way to win a fight. So I thought that was pretty funny.
Ben Kodesh L'chol, to separate the sacred from the ordinary.
One other real quick story about faith and sports. So one year there was a fight that was happening during Pesach, one of the first 2 days of Pesach. And so, so many people, not a lot of fighters, but so many people around boxing, promoters, publicists, writers, are Jewish. So actually, Alan and I worked on this together. We came up with this idea because, you after the fight, you do the interviews, you do all the stuff, and by midnight, everybody would be free. We spread the word. We wanted to have a Seder at midnight in the MGM Grand. We got the kitchen, the cooks at the MGM cooked us everything, chicken soup and chopped liver and everything. We had a real good turnout at a ballroom. We got I forgot how we got the Haggadahs, but we did. And we had a one of my most memorable Seders. It was my wife came with my daughter, and Alan was already there working, and we got a full table, and we had a Seder from midnight to 2 a.m. What a great Seder.
So when I ask you, is there faith in sports? How would you answer that?
Well, it's obvious. Every player scores a touchdown. The first thing he does is look up to the heavens. I mean, well, whatever your religion, everybody, athletes as a rule are very superstitious, and religion is a big part of what they have to wear. They're crazy, and they have to eat the same food at the same time if they win, and if they, Rogi Bashan, who used to be the goaltender for the Kings, he would. If he lost a game, he would drive a different way home than normal. And so someone said, we must have tried every street in LA because he lost a lot of games. But anyway, they each in each faith is a part, and they believe that, I mean, it gets ridiculous when they talk about God's rooting for our team versus the other team. That's a little far out. But no, they're all, their faith is all through sports for sure.
And then you've done some pretty crazy stories too outside of the major sports world. One is Captain Phil Harris on your time on a fishing boat, I believe. Tell us that story, and how do you find these people to tell these stories, and why was that story important to tell?
Well, it's from a show called The Deadliest Catch, which is on the Discovery Channel. And to tell you the truth, I had never even heard of it. And so they called me and asked me if I'd be interested in doing this book on Captain Phil Harris, who had passed away, but he was one of the most colorful characters in the. I mean, these people are all crazy. It's one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, crab fishing in the Bering Sea. And over a period, I forgot that when I did the book, I had the numbers. Something like 10 years, 27 fishermen had died. I mean, you're dealing in water that's 55 below zero. We can die of hypothermia. There's ice. It's just incredibly dangerous. And so I asked Alan. I said, they want me to do this book on Deadliest Catch, and Alan said, Dad, you have no idea how popular this show is. It's the biggest thing on TV. So I did the book, and I went up to Alaska. I went to Kodiak Island. I got on that fishing boat. I was in Anchorage for a while, and these guys are all nuts, but they're fascinating characters. And I even though it was crabs, I've never eaten crab, but I enjoyed doing the book. It was the only book I've really done that had nothing to do with sports, but it's a lot of fun. And in a way, when you write about something that you don't know about and you have to learn, you relate to the audience, and it's actually a good thing. When I got assigned to cover the Kings, I'd never seen a hockey game in person. And so, but the thing is, when you write about people. People are people, whatever they're in. You can learn the rules, but it's, Wayne Gretzky is a fascinating character. It doesn't matter that I didn't know anything about his game. I just knew that he was worth, learning about. So.
I know after the Captain Phil Harris, we saved you the Gomel Aliyah, which you came back quickly and said a nice Aliyah for your health return from Alaska.
Oh, right.
I love how you say you talk. It's not about the sports; it's about the person. And two things. First, I actually want to share something that most people don't know about you and your advocacy for the special needs world. Maybe tell, who are you, Steve Springer, as a person outside the sports world, and why special needs is so important, not just to you, but to obviously me and our community as well.
Well, obviously my daughter was born with cerebral palsy, and she was actually the poster child, national poster child for 10 years. She was in movies and TV shows, and she helped raise a lot of money. And I became totally involved in the handicapped community. And Dina has had an amazing life. She was affected physically, but not at all mentally. Actually, she's a genius with the way she handles numbers. And she went to college. She graduated from college. She got married to someone who also has cerebral palsy, Daniel Garcia. They have a wonderful child who's, if I might say it, an artist, and I don't say that lightly, but he really is, Brandon. And so it's an incredible community, and the stories in that community and what the people who are disabled in one way or another have to go through and yourself through your own family. It's very inspirational, and that's a side of my life that I'm glad I have away from sports. And Dina's now got a great job. We're working with Access Services, and she's an amazing person.
I'm proud to meet Dina and Daniel. I am proud to meet Brandon's preschool Rabbi when
That's
he started
right.
scribbling before he did some amazing artwork and just.
Oh, I thought you taught him how to do that.
Yeah, no, I can barely sign my name, but I can play a couple songs on the keyboard. And that connection between sports and faith, and within that world of hope and inspiration, I think, I mean, that is your story, and that's our story as well. You were named part of the Jewish Sports Hall of Fame of Southern California. What does that mean to you, representing not just the sports world, but also the faith world on a larger level?
Oh, it was a wonderful tribute. You know, all the famous names that are in that Hall of Fame, and it is a real honor just to say that that's on my resume, and I'm proud also, not because not just it's a sports award, but it represents Judaism, which is more important to me than sports. So I'm glad about
There's
that.
been a lot of change in the world, specifically the sports world, over the time that you started coming in with Showtime till today. What has been that change, and what do you see the change, either for the good or the not so good, coming forward in the sports world that will predict the future?
Well, I think there's good and bad. I think I'm obviously, if I was a professional athlete, I'd be thrilled with the money. I mean, it's so much different now, but in a way, it's created, as I said before, it's these gaps between the players and everybody else because they're just on a totally different financial plane. Walter O'Malley one time, before free agency came along, players in baseball were tied to their club, and then free agency was coming along. It came along after Sandy Koufax had retired, but so Walter O'Malley, who was then the owner, was asked, what would you have had to pay Sandy Koufax if he was a free agent? And O'Malley said, Sandy and I would have been partners. So that the money is just, I mean, it's created an inability for many people to even afford going to games. It's great for the players. I mean, I don't begrudge them. If they didn't get the money, the owners would get it. It's not like they're going to hand it out to the poor. But the plus side is that a lot of athletes like LeBron James and others have gotten involved in social issues, have gotten involved in battling racism, have gotten involved in voter registration, have spoken out. You know, one of the right-wing conservative hosts on Fox had said that LeBron ought to just shut up and dribble. And to his credit, he took that line, that snarly line, and made a show out of it called Shut Up and Dribble, and had all these people on and spoke out against police brutality and racism. And you know, I remember back, I shouldn't say I remember, I wasn't working then, but I was doing a book on the Lakers, and I found that because a lot of players back in that era, African-American players, they could play after Jackie Robinson came along, but they couldn't stay in the same hotels. They couldn't stay in eat in the same restaurants. And so they were on an exhibition tour, the Lakers were, through the South, and they came to a town where Elgin Baylor wasn't allowed to stay in the same hotel with his teammates. So he announced he wasn't going to play. And the promoters, because on those barnstorming trips before the season starts, those games mean life or death to these small towns. And so the city fathers all got together. They were frantic, and they changed the rules and allowed him to stay just that one night. He could stay in the hotel, and so he played in the game. So I mean, there's been a lot, and in those days, the players really didn't have any platform to speak out against that kind of stuff, except what Elgin did. But nowadays, I think it's great that they all do speak out. They should. I mean, they're citizens. They're human beings. They have things that they see are unfair, and now they talk about it.
And so this morning, you have a Koufax story, a Jewish Koufax Dodger story for us.
Which one?
Which one? Ooh, I like that.
With Yom Kippur, yeah, sure. Well, the great line from that. So Sandy Koufax, everybody knows, didn't pitch in 1965 in the first game of the World Series because it was Yom Kippur, and so they put Don Drysdale was the number 2 guy. So he pitched, and he got bombed. He was blown out. Like by the 4th or 5th inning, he'd given up 5 runs, and Walter Alston, the manager, came out to take the ball from him, and Drysdale said to him, right about now, I'm guessing you probably wish I was Jewish too. That was a great line. But yeah, I could tell you real quick a story about.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I'm working for the Dodgers, and I'm a kid. I'm 18, 19 years old, and I got interviews with Sandy Koufax, whose poster is on my bedroom wall. And normally I didn't get nervous interviewing athletes, but that time I was nervous. So I had a tape recorder, and I went up to him and I asked him if I could interview him. I'd never spoken to him, and he says, "Yeah, sure." And so I start to do the interview, and I'm going to say an older guy came running around the corner. When I'm 18, anybody over 30 is older, but. And he says, "Sandy, I'm from the AP. I'm the blah 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 blah. I need an interview." And I can't say anything. I'm basically a kid. And he says, "Just a minute. I'm talking to this young man here. When I'm done with him, I'll talk to you." He says, "But I'm on deadline." And Sandy says, "I don't care if this kid's only going to play this tape for his parents, and your story is going to go to 1 million people. I said I'd talk to him first, and I'm going to talk to him first." And I'm like, yes. So that was kind of cool. But.
No, but I think that tells a larger story of the human touch of what we don't see, right? You don't write that story, but you feel that story. And today you tell that story because it meant something to you, just like Eric Karros and the Private Ryan and all the stories that you share.
Right.
Steve, it is a pleasure. I know this was a long time coming. It's always been a pleasure to daven with you. I missed our Yom Kippur Kol Nidre walks home together.
Yeah.
But I know over the years we have stayed in contact, and I know all of the stories that you have told over the years have made such a difference, not just to your audience, but to the sports world, to the Jewish world, and to the world at large. Steve Springer, Los Angeles Lakers historian, Los Angeles Times journalist, member of the Jewish Sports Hall of Fame, but as we like to say here on Rabbi on the Sidelines, a good old mensch. Steve, it's good to see you, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much,
everybody.
Thank you.